information that can explain it better than I can. And Fritz Springmeier's books, all four of them, deal with these subjects and the Illuminati. And a book that would make you understand personally what it's like to grow up in a satanic family would be Kathy O'Brien's Transformation of America. Kathy O'Brien was a sex slave for the Illuminati. And her story in Transformation of America details the first 30 years of her life in a generational satanic family, and how her father sold her to the intelligence agencies to be used as a presidential model sex slave and black ops operative. And it's a really, really important book. Any person in America that wants to understand the true heart of the evil they're dealing with in the elite needs to read that book. So, you got any calls?
No one is holding on the line yet, so if anyone does want to call in, you have those numbers. I'd recommend another couple of books, actually, on the topic. I think the Franklin Cover-Up is an excellent book to understand how this satanic abuse is covered up by the so-called authorities, how the police won't get involved, how courts won't get involved. I believe that's written by John DeCamp. And I think, in general, a great book about mind control is Mass Control by Jim Keith, that goes into a variety of both trauma-based techniques as well as mass mind control techniques like propaganda and mass mind manipulation perpetrated upon the masses of people. So I think those are two excellent books to cover this topic as well. So what I really like to ask you in particular, or actually I'd have a comment and then a couple of questions, but one of the things you mentioned is that when you went to the police, their complete unwillingness to get involved with anything in taking down this system of abuse and torture. And you had talked about a lot of these police are involved in some of this cult activity. But what I would like to bring up is the attitude of some of these elitists when it comes to the so-called controlling classes, which aren't really the controlling classes, they're the mind-controlled classes, but people who think that they're in some form of control, like the police, the military, etc., even the intelligence agency operatives. In my years of involvement in the occult, and we've had discussions about this in private, in our levels, about our levels of involvement, clearly yours goes deeper as far as being in the heart of an Illuminati bloodline-based family. My involvement in the occult was based in more peripheral structures, secret societies you could call it, but they're basically outer-lying structural formations that are there to basically weed out people who are unsuited to propagating the agenda of the higher-ups, and to take people that have a more psychopathic personality up to higher levels of this outer shell, you could call it, and into the center of the web, so to speak. So it's a weeding out process, or it's a process of discovering certain personality traits that they're looking for to take people into higher levels of involvement. And in my dealing with occultists at this level of the hierarchy, the attitude that they displayed toward the police and military was so appalling and revealing simultaneously that I could barely believe some of the things that came out of these people's mouth when they talked about how they viewed the police in general. And they basically called the police our dogs, was a term that I always heard them mention referring to the police. They called them our mutts, our dogs. They just said, we have these beings, if you even want to call them that, on such a leash that they're not even human beings. They might as well just simply, we just refer to them as our dogs, because they will do whatever we command as long as money keeps flowing to their paycheck in their direction, or their pensions, however you want to view it, depending on their involvement, whether it's police or military. But in comparison to the general population, who they call the dead, by the way, because they consider them spiritually dead, having no discernment, like you talked about earlier. They don't even consider them to be alive, so they look at it as, we are abstained from anything we may do to these people, because for all intents and purposes they are already spiritually dead. So I don't know if you saw anything like that in your years of involvement in the cult that you were traumatized by, but I just wanted to bring that up as a comment.
Well, all right, I'm going to tell this story. I have basically 7 years of satanic ritual abuse stories I could share. And I'm looking at my notes, and I didn't want to talk about this story, but I'm going to now. It was a man my father worked with who had a little girl. My father liked to sexually abuse this little girl. So we as a family would go over to this man's house, and he had a wife and his little girl. And my father and this man would have a few beers, and then the sexual abuse would start. I believe that my father was paying this man to abuse his daughter. And I also believe that this man at first thought it was okay because his daughter was like 3 years old. And I think I was probably at the most 3.5, 4. What I remember was this man one day when we were over at his house, I remember seeing him with a rather disgusted look on his face, that he realized what he was doing was wrong and he was going to put a stop to it, which I believe he did. Because irregardless of whether he could believe that his daughter would remember the abuse or not, I think he had decided that this was a selfish and wrong thing to do. Now, my father in the cult had a hypnotic device that was the size of the palm of your hand. This hypnotic device I always called a spinner. It could, once he triggered that spinning hypnotic device, you would be hypnotized in probably 10 seconds. Now, I believe that you need to have had some form of dissociative conditioning for that spinner to hypnotize you, but who knows? Maybe not. But my father did use the spinner on myself, my brothers, and other victims. But what I was going to say about this one man, as he tried to break away from my father abusing his daughter, I remember my mother and father talking about the situation. And my father said to my mother, "Everything's fine. They sent some detectives over to talk to him and straighten him out." So this man was going to go to the police and submit himself as a child molester in order to get to my father. But when the police came to him and told him what was going on, in fact, telling him that they basically gave him an ultimatum. They said, "If you don't kill yourself, we're going to throw you in jail for pedophilia or murder you." Anyway, several days later, he ran his car into a concrete abutment and killed himself. But I remember my father and mother talking about this man and saying that police detectives had talked to him. And I'm filling in that the police detectives told him who was running the show, and that was the Illuminati.
I see we have a caller from southeastern Pennsylvania. Let's take this call. Caller from the Philadelphia area. You're on What on Earth is Happening?
Hi, Mark. Hi, Neo. This is Chris.
Hey, Chris. How are you?
Good. First of all, I want to thank Neo for coming forward with this information. I think it's by the grace of God that he remembers what happened, and it takes a lot of courage to do what he's doing. I can't imagine how many other people out there have had similar experiences but can't remember because they've been hypnotized or brainwashed or whatever. I get a sense by comparing who I think what we really can be as a species to what we are, that what Neo is saying is true, that the forces that we are up against are imaginably evil, and I'm not certain how we're going to conquer this evil, but I'm certain that we will, with the help of God. I don't know what the next step is. I think one of the reasons they are able to control people is because they use fear. Like you talk about the police officers, and then they fall in line because they're fearful. Well, some of the people in this world who aren't fearful need to take a stand collectively, together, and put an end to this insanity. Because Satan is ruling this world. And if you really realize who we are, not just humans, but spiritually, and what we're doing in this world, it's clear to me that that's the case.
I couldn't agree more, Chris. I think that's a brilliant insight and an excellent way to basically explain it. Fear is the force that is holding this satanic hierarchy in its position of so-called power in the world, which is basically illusory power because it is based in fear. But I'll let Neo respond to that.
All right, thanks, Mark. Thanks, Neo.
You're welcome. It's amazing to me that of the, well, I know very well that in this region, thousands